Welcome to another episode of the Libertarian Christian Podcast, a project of the Libertarian Christian Institute and part of the Christians for Liberty Network. I'm your host, Doug Stuart. And if you're watching, you'll see that I have Preston Sprinkle with us. He's a New York Times bestselling author and host of the podcast Theology in the Raw. His latest book is Exiles, the Church in the Shadow of Empire, which we talked about on episode 364, which is not too long ago. And he is also editor of this Bible here that I'm holding up, the Upside Down Kingdom Bible. Hey Preston, thanks for joining us to talk about this Bible you wrote.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me back on. The Bible I wrote.
Yeah, I'm glad you caught that for sure.
My kids refer to it like, "When's that Bible that you wrote coming out?" And I just have to stop them and say, "Didn't write the Bible."
So how long has this been how long has this been in the works? I mean, it's got to be forever.
Goes back to, I want to say the conversations were happening in 2019.
Okay.
And I really started heavy work in 2020. We started work on it.
Okay. Yeah. That's cool.
There's a ton of just behind. I mean, gosh, I think we have over 40 authors, and just to identify the authors we wanted, I mean, going back and forth with 40 authors, and then some said no, so we have to find other people then to identify, well, okay, which passages are we going to address? Which themes are we, all the behind the scenes stuff was way more challenging than I had ever anticipated. I've never done anything like this before, so
yeah. So I'm kind of curious how does that conversation get started? Because there are 6 dozen Bibles published every week that are very different. And they have their different niches. Some of them are published by like people who are like have their own following. Like there might be some like Faith Works Healer or something, create their own Bible, or whatever it is. But like, and I see some of these at like discount bookstores, and I was just like, well, that was an interesting concept. That would be interesting to me, and so forth. What's the state of? I mean, what do you know of the state of like Bible production? I don't even know how to word it, because this isn't a study Bible per se. It's, how would you describe it?
Yeah, well, it is a study Bible. Study Bibles have gone through kind of a interesting evolution. I know this is all stuff I've learned through this process. Let me go way back when Zondervan first approached me to consider being the general editor of a new study Bible. I said no. I'm more of an academic, and academics typically kind of look down their noses at study Bibles. If I'm totally honest, I'm not saying this isn't across the board, and I'm not saying we have evidence for this necessarily, but the perception is study Bibles are a kind of pseudo-academic exercise, and it's a marketing ploy to make money. And, academics like to be cynical about all things related to Christianity, American evangelicalism and big circus. And so we're like,
not without reason, though. Not without reason.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, there's definitely some fodder there to feed our appetites. But so I said, no, I'm not going to, do that. And they said, okay, well, if we have an idea in mind, and we really want you to be the editor. So if you're not going to do it, we're not going to do this project. Why don't you, we'll come back and... I think I said, no, I'm not interested. And then they kind of got my interest on the project. But I said, well, look, I'm too busy right now. I said, okay, well, we're not going to move forward unless you are interested. So they came back a year later, and that's when we really sat down, and I said, all right, I'm going to be honest. Here's my thoughts on study Bibles. And long story short, they kind of shared the vision, saying, yeah, we totally understand that, those concerns, and we very much resonate with that. And then one of the people at Zondervan, who's kind of runs the study Bibles, branch of Zondervan, she explained to me kind of all the fruit that does come from certain study Bibles. Mm-hmm. And it's not just that each one has a little niche, the women's study Bible, the Bible background study Bible, the whatever,
the single mother study Bible.
Yeah. Like, and some of those,
I don't know if that exists. I'm making up words that sound like, again, I understand the intent here, and I understand like the fodder you just said. It's right. That's why it came up.
And I think that certainly is the case with some study Bibles, but hearing Zondervan's vision for, there are certain people who, and certain aspects of Scripture that study Bibles do legitimately draw attention to, not force into the text, but actually open up areas of the Bible to people, and it's been really impactful for people's lives. And they sharing stories, and so what I think once she shared her, this is one of the editors there, her vision behind study Bibles. I'm like, okay, well, if what you're saying is true, that doesn't sound too bad. I can get on board with that. But then I said, okay, but if I was going to do a study Bible, I would want to do it, I would want, actual scholars writing. I would want to, and my personal passion would be, so many study Bibles are oriented toward personal individualism, personal sanctification. It's all about the individual Christian and their sort of felt needs. I said, I would want to roll the dice and do something a little riskier and say, let's address sociopolitical issues that the Bible, I think, speaks very thoroughly to. Let's talk about politics. Let's talk about race. Let's talk about immigration. Let's talk about, creation care and all these hot button issues that are just going to get Christians all riled up, Let's do it in a very thoughtful, winsome, exegetical way. And they said, that's exactly why we want you to be in charge of this project. So long story short, I mean, there was a really small window where, a specific kind of study Bible I can get on board with. And they were like, that's what we want you to do. So I said, all right, I'm in.
Yeah. Okay. So is there a difference between so when I think of a study Bible, I think of I can look in the I can have notes where it's okay, so I've read Romans 13, 1 and 2, and I want to know what the study note says.
Yes. That's
not quite what this one is. There's basically the NIV footnotes, and we'll talk about translation here in a bit, but the NIV footnotes, but then basically these are sidebars.
Yes.
And I don't know what you call them when you're producing them. There's sidebars, and then there's essays or articles. What?
Yes. Okay, so they explained to me that there has been a shift in the nature of study Bibles from a sort of footnoted comment on every verse to more extended sidebars on a fewer number of passages. I'll be honest.
Okay.
I'll be honest. I think I was given a Ryrie study Bible when I was 13, and then when I went to Master's Seminary. That was right when the MacArthur study Bible came out.
I had that study Bible. My dad still uses it, the MacArthur study Bible, back when I was a John MacArthur person.
Yeah.
And he still has it. He still uses it. He has every now and then he'll send me photos of the notes I wrote on the side.
And there is not a single verse or most verses that don't have some comment on it. So I'll be honest. I prefer that. If I'm going to go to study, I'm that's just, to my mind, that's what a study Bible is. You can get a comment on basically every passage.
Yeah.
They said that kind of study Bible has kind of fallen out of vogue. People actually prefer, especially younger people, I'm 48, so my age and younger, millennials, Gen Z, they actually like the more sidebar approach. Those have really taken off and landed with an audience. And I said, okay, I personally prefer the footnote or whatever, but I'm going to go, it's not for me, it's for, people. So,
sure.
So I said, all right, well, I'll follow your lead if this is the way pretty much all study Bibles are going. So I did not know that going. I just assumed it would be this kind of, footnoted version. So
my guess is it probably made your job a little easier.
I think, I can't imagine going through every single verse it seems easier.
Nobody ever comments on literally every single verse unless you're making a commentary on the book of, let's say, Isaiah or something.
We still, shockingly, there are still, I think, over 300,000 words that make up the study notes. So there is still even though it looks
extensive, yeah.
I mean, to put it in perspective, your average 250 page book is about 60,000.
Yeah.
Ish words. So I mean, it's about 4 or 5 or 6 books worth of.
I just opened up to Ecclesiastes. I'm just going to hold this up for the camera for those of you not watching. Sorry, guys.
Yeah.
This is what you're seeing here. You're seeing basically a 2/3 or probably 3/4 wide single margin NIV text, and then you have these sidebar notes and stuff. And I was a little shocked because I'm all right, I'm just gonna randomly open to a bunch of passages and see how many blank side notes do I have. And how many blank side notes do I have, and there weren't as many as you'd think. I mean, obviously the Bible is really long. I mean, it's 1,100 pages here. No, 1,700 pages of this particular edition. And so then you have those sidebars, and those are, I've read through some of those. I obviously didn't read all of this for prep, because it just came to my mail last week anyway. But these are on particular topics that you could have themed throughout. So you have leadership and power, women, science, leadership and power. Okay, they were in Chronicles, that's why. Trauma and resilience. What we got here? But then you have those essays in the middle. Are you calling them essays?
So we had, so the way we, I'll save you all the background, dividing how many passages each theme would count. It was, I mean, a headache. So if an author was going to address, say 20 notes. So, okay, wealth and poverty in the Old Testament, we collected 20 passages for you. Actually, that one would be a lot more, but say wealth and poverty in the Pentateuch. You have 20 notes. We want 5 of those notes to be 300 words, which would be a full page note, and 15 to be shorter, say 220. I think the word count was 225 for a sidebar, and I think 350 for a full page note. And so about 75% of the notes were more sidebar, and then we reserved, another 25% for those more extended, Like if you go to Genesis 1 and 2, you see a lot of extended notes just because, man, we're dealing with sexuality and gender, science, I mean, all kinds of stuff. So,
yeah. And then you had the intros, right? Like you had the intro to each book. Yeah. Did you write any of these, or were you just generally, were you the just general editor? Did you contribute to some of the other?
So I wrote all the notes on sexuality and gender. And then all the notes on grace.
Okay.
The grace one, that doesn't seem like is that a cultural issue? Kind of. I mean, cancel culture.
That was one of my questions. I was like, grace? Really?
Okay. So we did need to comment. We wanted to comment on as many passages as we could. We didn't want huge chunks of the study Bible to not have any notes. So we did have a few more general themes like grace or holiness. But even there, we said, can you, as you seek to make application, grace, holiness, what are some socio-cultural, political issues that you can sort of help people to view through the lens of grace? And I think something like, cancel culture or some political tribalism or stuff, I think we live in a very graceless society, So not just God's personal grace towards me as an individual, that's important, but then how do we think about Christian grace through a more socio-political lens? So
How did you avoid the possible, I won't say temptation, because it's not really a temptation. How do you avoid not looking like you're trying to shoehorn concepts into certain texts? Like there was a Bible, the Green Bible, that came out about 15, 20 years ago. It was an NRSV, and it was like basically the lettering was green. It was a green letter Bible, I think is what it was called, instead of red letter Bible. And that was a clever little thing. And I read a review of it, and it was just like, there's things there were things highlighted in green or printed in green letters that were like, really? This is about creation care? Because that was kind of the thing. And it's how do you avoid, again, shoehorning in or eisegeting this passage is also about this, or we can learn about sexuality and gender from this particular proverb.
Yeah. So that's a great. First of all, that was a huge concern of ours that we would work hard to avoid that. Again, I'm primarily a biblical scholar and exegete, so I'm very passionate about not doing that. I think so. That was one thing. They hired a guy that was going to work really hard not to read into the Bible. Number two, we picked, as we thought, what are the themes we're gonna plan on addressing throughout the study of Bible? Like, I was mainly in charge and with bouncing ideas off other people, but picking themes that I already knew were intrinsic to the Bible. Things like social justice or politics is everywhere in the Bible. Race and ethnicity. Like, even though race is a modern social construct, I mean, ethnic tensions are very pertinent especially to the New Testament. But even in the Old. I mean, so we picked themes ahead of time that I knew were these are already embedded in the storyline of Scripture. There were a few like technology and media where I was like, I don't want to read into, that was one of the themes, technology and media. I don't want to read into passages what the biblical authors are not concerned about. But the idea of technology goes back to the invention of the wheel, So we did want to say, what are some passages that do address ancient forms of technology? Yeah. And are there any sort of implications we can draw from that? So, we told the authors, like, when you write your note, just think roughly 50% is just exegesis. Okay. Like tell us what the passage means. And then roughly 50%, and it could be 30, 70, depending on the note.
Yeah.
Tease out some modern application. So there we did have with some of these topics like technology and media that I think do have passages that address it. We had to be really careful not to draw too much of us. Like we just had to be careful in our application to make sure we're not reading too much in the text. So all that to say, we're fallible, we're human. It wasn't perfect, I'm sure, but we were very aware of working hard to not read into the text what's not there.
Yeah. You probably can't sort of humorous thought here. Like if you added Walter Brueggemann to your list, he'd probably talk about propaganda in the Solomonic era or something, which would like totally derail that type of project.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah. And we had I was a general editor. We had a team of like 3 or 4 other editors too. And so that these notes did have, and most were biblical scholars. So the notes did have to pass scrutiny, and there's heavy editing. There were some notes I sent back and said this isn't good. So let's talk about the Bible translation choice. Is that just a Zondervan thing? Is it just like what's going on there? I don't mind.
It's the New International Version. Just FYI for those listening, I mentioned it.
Okay, so Zondervan early on it says, "Would you be okay with the NIV being the translation?" They said, first of all, it is still the most widely read translation. So this Bible is going to find itself in the hands of a lot more people. Number 2, we own the rights to the NIV, so it just makes it way easier to produce with the NIV. I'm pretty there's certain translations that I like. Like I really like the CSB. Mm-hmm. If I want to do meticulous reading, I mean the New American Standard, I hate the name, it's just so ethnocentric, but it is the most woodenly literal. Like I can almost predict what Greek and Hebrew word is lying behind the English, but it's not a very readable when you're just wanting to get like an overview of the Samson cycle or something, So I think different translations serve different purposes. I think reading the Old Testament narratives and the NLT is really, really good. But then if you're going to narrow down, the fine-tuned word study, then CSB, NASB, and the Book of Romans. To me, I'm not a translation Nazi. So I'm like, if you think this translation will be better for the study Bible and find its way in the hands of the most people, then that's fine. Yeah. Wasn't a hill I was going to die on. Even though I don't personally. Well, I do. I mean, sometimes I read out the NIV. In fact, my New Testament is a Greek English New Testament, and the New Testament translation is NIV.
Okay,
I like that because I got the Greek right there. So, and half the time I'm like, this NIV translation isn't really capturing what the Greek say, or it's not. It's just kind of like, I don't know, smoothing it out a little bit.
I have a lot of appreciation for the NIV because it was the first non-King James Bible that I read. Well, I shouldn't say that. I read the New King James, which it's essentially the same in a lot of ways. And then, I got into college and had NIV for probably a decade, same Bible. Okay. And I don't know, just got really in love with, the flow of all of that. And, now I'm more of an NRSV kind of person. Okay. But one thing, our Bible study, we noticed we're going through Jonah right now, and we read the first chapter. And it was interesting that the Hebrew word that would have been hurled, like God hurled a wind, the fish hurled Jonah up onto the sea, I'm pretty sure is the same Hebrew word. And I kind of knew that from a class I took in Bible college. But one translation translate that word 6 different ways. And it's like, oh wow, okay, you would have gotten that out of reading the NASB, right? You would have been able to pick up on that kind of thing. But if you just want to read the narrative, you'd be fine.
So the NIV translates the Hebrew word for hurl several different ways. So I
don't know if it was that one. I think what did we read? We read the New Living, or we read the Common English Bible. I can't remember. We read several different ones, and none of them consistently translated the same Hebrew word, same word. Which, if you're trying a little bit of variety, I guess that's fine, and especially if one word can mean sort of the same thing, but you don't get the literary aspect of it if you miss that. But anyway, that's not what you're going for in this Bible. I have a question. I know you and I have talked about this in previous conversations, and it's kind of in the air to some extent about the word faith and allegiance. You'd think allegiance would be in a Bible about the kingdom. So did that get cut, or was it just not on the table? Like
a study notes on allegiance.
Yeah. You one of your themes. Yeah, sorry, one of your themes, or maybe it's in there and it didn't get listed in the.
It's not a theme.
Yeah. Or loyalty, something in that realm, like because you'd think that. The division between kingdom of God, kingdom of man would show up somewhere.
Yeah, I would hope it would show up in the notes on. We did have notes on politics, and Michael Bird wrote those. I would have to go back and see, like on Acts 17, other places where he's.
Yeah.
I would think it would come up under the theme of politics. It's a big blur to me whether.
Yeah, maybe it is. Maybe that is where it would come up.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of Even now, I could probably think of several other themes. Like maybe we should have done that.
Maybe we should. Yeah, well, that's gonna always be the case.
Some of those, like I would, even if that came up as a possibility, I would, I think a case could be made for putting that under the theme of politics, because that's really what we're talking about, right? I mean, allegiance to the kingdom of God over against allegiance to the state.
Yeah.
I'd be curious on Romans 13. Did he write that? I'm almost positive.
Well, if he did, I already had problems with Michael Bird's take on Romans 13, but he can come. Yeah.
Here's another thing. Did we not? Yeah, another issue too. Yeah, we don't on Romans 13. Let's see. Wealth, pottery, warfare, violence. Yeah, no, Paul. So another thing is, you might have one passage like Romans 13 that could address several different issues, and you only have room for one or two margins. So we did have to negotiate. There's several places where I'm like, hey, we have 5 potential themes that we could write on. Which 2 are we going to choose? So as there were those decisions that had to be made. Also, I in selecting the authors, I wanted healthy diversity. So I couldn't stack the deck in favor of like, I'm going to get a bunch of libertarians to write on politics and pacifists to write on all the warfare pass. Although we did kind of do, I did have a. I was
going to say, if you're going to have a pacifist, or if you're going to have anybody write on the warfare, you need an Anabaptist, right?
Well, I did. Miles Wernz, who is a pacifist, wrote. Okay. But I said, hey, look, I'm going to agree with your take, but your take has to be, you can't be ramming through your interpretation. It has to be more less dogmatic. Same thing with Chris Date, who's an annihilationist, wrote on the afterlife. And I told him ahead of time, I said, hey, look, you and I are in agreement here, but we can't.
It has to be an open-endedness to some of the way you say things.
Yes, you have to say, hey, here's different ways to read this passage. Here's, maybe some arguments for both sides, and leave it at that. And he was okay with that. And same thing with the passage. Michael Bird on politics. He and I overlap more than we disagree. But
sure,
I would maybe have written the notes slightly differently. But I'm okay. This isn't the Preston Sprinkle Study Bible. It is, capturing, diverse viewpoints. So
when you start your own seminary and have, you can have the Preston Sprinkle Study Bible.
Oh, it's funny. Yeah,
Theology. Let's see, seminary in the raw. That's probably not going to work.
Study Bible in the raw.
Oh my gosh. So wow, you've kind of already addressed a lot of my questions here. But I did have one. Why wouldn't you? Okay, you kind of already answered this to some extent, but a lot of this material could have just been a book, right? And then the authors could have been identified more or less. Like, unless I started reading your preface or your intro, I wouldn't even known that you were the general editor, other than like someone told me. So like, your name isn't out there quite as much as it would be on like a book that you edited that's about politics in the kingdom. Why a Bible versus, or was it just a matter of that's how the story developed?
I would say that, yeah, it's just a matter of how the story developed. I mean, back in 2019, 2020, I was already finishing my book on transgender identities. And then I think at that point I still had the back of my mind to write my book on exiles, which came out last year or this year. So I think that my book on exiles, it is kind of like, this is my book length, treatment of the stuff that maybe could have been part of the study Bibles. Yeah, so I think it just kind of formed that way. Do
you think there's an advantage to having the notes in a Bible versus trying to sell a book? Like, are people, because a lot of Americans have lots of Bibles, right?
Yeah.
And I'll say this, I'm not going to be taking this one to church per se. I'll read it because I'm heavy, like, you know what? I know some of these themes. I want to hear what Preston and his team has to say about these themes. I might be writing an article or doing a podcast or something like that.
Yeah.
But like, I don't know. I mean, maybe people will adopt this. It does come in a leather-ish version and a hardcover, but is it more for the like, hey, I want to know what people think about this, read my Bible, as opposed to going and grabbing a book off a shelf? Is that the advantage?
I think there's, all these themes, there's lots of books that address these themes. I think it would be kind of boring to put all these notes in a 300-page book. That would be, I think, tedious to read. I wonder, I think it goes back to kind of the genre and purpose of study Bibles, so that people can see in the text that the text speaks not just to our individual salvation and sanctification, but to broader sociopolitical issues. And having those notes contained in an actual Bible, I think, is probably even just symbolically more powerful than putting them in a book. But I think it was just the way the conversation arose.
Yeah, that's cool. So I want to give you a few minutes to talk about you have an upcoming conference. This episode probably won't actually be airing until after that conference, so it's going to be kind of awkward but will people be able to get to it? Maybe I shouldn't ask you this. Will people be able to get to the content of that conference, either pay or free, whatever, after it happens?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So this conference, we're recording this in mid to late September. Tell us about the conference. What it's all about. When did it happen?
Okay, so this is our fourth Exiles in Babylon conference. It's in Denver, Colorado, October 4th to 5th. So yes, if this is after those dates, you can go to theologyintheraw.com and you can purchase all the videos and of the conference. And we try to do a good job, have lots of different cameras, angles. We have a guy who edits, makes them really clean and so it's not just a camera in the back room, filming. It's actually produced.
You didn't get your nephew to just throw up an iPhone on a tripod.
No, and they're shot very well. So you can get the content of that. So we're talking about the way the Exiles in Babylon conference works is we do a deep dive into a few topics. So there's 3 sessions at the conference. The first session, we're talking about discipleship in an election year. Not so much, it is kind of about politics, but more about how should Christians be disciples of Jesus in this volatile election season. So Russ Moore is going to be there, Caitlin Shess, and then Derwin Gray. And then we have the boys over at the Church Politics podcast, Justin Gibney and Chris Butler, who are going to do like a live podcast response to the talks. Lots of interaction, discussion amongst the speakers. Our next session is on sexuality after purity culture. Most of us recognize, some of the damage that purity culture did. And so what do we replace it with? We can't just ditch sexual purity, I don't think. So we have Rachel Joy Welcher, who wrote an excellent book on purity culture. Christina Emba, who's talked about it from a different angle. And then Tony Scarcello, who grew up same-sex attracted in the church and is kind of like, where was I in the purity culture talks? I'm not So I love to get different speakers who are kind of addressing things from a different angle. Maybe they might not even agree with each other on stage, and then we kind of work through that in a conversation. And then the third topic is fake news, propaganda, and healthy news consumption or media consumption with Patrick Miller and Jay Kim, talking about kind of just how can we navigate all the just vast streams of information coming our way. How do we sort out good information, disinformation, propaganda?
Patrick's a good guy to have on that. I had him on my show, I think.
Very good. Yeah. So, so those are 3 topics, but I do want to announce, so this isn't actually public yet, but it will be, I think, when this is released.
Yeah.
That's kind of so we are doing another Exiles in Babylon 3-day conference in Minneapolis.
Okay.
April 3rd to 5th, 2025. And we're still in the planning stages of what we're going to address, but that one's going to be, we're going to address, we're talking about some really important issues there. So Minneapolis, April 3rd, 2025.
Are you going to wait till after the election to start to invite people?
We will
or will it be not election dependent?
We will promote that one at the Exiles in October. So again, when this is released, it'll probably already be public. So
yeah. From a personal experience for people who might want to attend these, what are they going to get out of this as opposed to just like sitting and listening to a bunch of people talk? Because we can do that in podcasts.
The talks are shorter, 15 minutes typically from each person. There's a lot more emphasis on dialogue. So the way they often go is like 3 15-minute talks. Sometimes you'll hear different angles to the same topic where there's some disagreement. Other times it might be agreement, but different perspectives on the same thing. And then we sit on the couch. We have a 45 to an hour long conversation. And then we open it up audience Q&A. We don't, if a speaker is like, sometimes we'll invite a speaker and they're like, oh yeah, I'm not going to do Q&A. It's like, well, then you're not invited. If you can't handle a good pushback from the audience, then I don't trust what you're saying in the first place. So, very down to earth. All the speakers that we've had at past conferences say that we've never experienced such a down to earth, relational, non-prestigious conference. We value conversations. We value hitting the hard topics, making people uncomfortable. So for instance, one of the sessions we're going to have in the spring, I guess I can say this, is transgender people in the church. So we're going to have a psychological perspective, theological perspective, and then we're going to have a few testimonies from a diverse range of trans-identified people. And these are real people out there. Might as well hear what they have to say. They're going to have different perspectives and viewpoints, but we want to humanize the conversation while thinking biblically and critically about it. So, one more thing. Last spring we did a whole session on deconstruction in the church. So rather than talking about people who have deconstructed and saying, oh, this is why they're deconstructing, they just love to smoke pot or they love their sin or they're just, whatever. And it's, like all the people that haven't deconstructed, all kinds of opinions, all people that deconstructed.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, let's actually hear from people who have deconstructed. So we had a whole range of people who deconstructed for various reasons. One went evangelical to Catholic. Another one went evangelical to progressive. Tim Whitaker from the New Evangelicals is there, and I get all kinds of flack. You're platforming all these. I'm like, not platform. I'm just if you want to understand why people deconstructed, I don't know.
What's wrong? Well, here's the thing.
Let's listen to people who deconstructed.
I don't know why it's even wrong. I don't know why you should shy away from platforming this, right? Like that in and of itself helps them control whether or not you should, and to give people a voice is not wrong. Right. Especially if your overall goal is to simply listen, hear from them, and let the conversation unfold in a way that we can arrive at truth together.
Yes.
I heard some of the stuff Flack said about you about this, and it was just like, hang on. First of all, I know Preston enough. I mean, it's not like we're buddy. It's not like I'm texting you every day or anything. But like, I know you enough to know that this is not a fair description of what's going on. I've listened to your show enough, and that's just not your heart. It's just not where you are. But the idea of platforming somebody is as a sin. It's like, well, hold on. And the fact that you just described deconstructors who like just basically switch denominations to some extent, or like switch their views, to me, deconstructing and saying, well, now I'm just going to be a rabid atheist or something is a very, very different prospect than saying, well, I didn't like evangelical conservatism, or I didn't like the Reformed faith that I was in, and I found a home in Eastern Orthodoxy, or I found a home in Roman Catholicism, or I found a home in, the Mennonites, or whatever it is. It's like, or I found the home in I don't know where yet, and I'm still searching. I don't know why that's wrong to platform, so I wouldn't shy away from that if I were you.
The recent verbalization of the word platforming, it doesn't really work for the kinds of things that I'm doing. Like it's one thing. Okay. If I was a pastor and I platform somebody to preach a sermon on the stage, like that genre of communication is more, here is our best attempt to present truth according to God's, what this person's saying. if I platform some people that were like, yeah, atheists or super progressive or super hyper conservative, you know, like people I didn't agree with on a church on a Sunday morning from a stage. Yeah, I get that. My podcast is not that. It is, as I say, it's often, it's more like curious conversations with a neighbor than a sermon from a stage. And the conference is sort of in between. Like there are certain sessions where I'm like, no, every single one of these speakers, we are giving you what we think is a good and healthy perspective. But we also have debates. We did annihilation versus eternal conscious torment. We did different views on the problem of evil with Greg Boyd and Joey Dodson, who have very different perspectives on that. And so, we're going to mix it up. You're going to hear testimonies. If we do a testimony time, that doesn't mean we are, you know, they're preaching a sermon at you. They're just saying, here has been my journey. Whether you agree with it or not, this is just simply a journey of somebody in the church. And that is something we can learn from. So the platform Nazis, I mean, they just don't understand. They have a very narrow view of what like a conference or, you know, podcast must look like. So which way? That's not my audience. I mean, the chirpy people.
It's this idea of don't let people say something unless you believe it to be true. Right, exactly. And that's not your approach. It's not my approach. I mean, goodness,
right.
I would only be able to interview myself. If I kind of live by that, that's not true. But no, just keep platforming people who are honest, Preston.
Thank you.
But yeah, you should. Well, you already did the deconstruction. I was say Brad Jerzak has written a book on that. That would probably be good to read, called Out of the Embers. I haven't read it yet.
Interesting.
It's on my shelf. It's kind of one of those to read kind of things. But he's been like all the denominations, and then he became Eastern Orthodox probably 5-6 years ago, a little bit longer. But yeah. Okay. So yeah, well, hey, I appreciate you coming on here talking about this Bible you didn't write, and I wish you well on the upcoming conference here. Maybe one of these days I'll be able to attend. You need to come to the East Coast. I don't know if it's a time zone thing. If you're like, I can't go more than 2 time zones.
We thought. I mean, Minneapolis isn't.
It's not too far.
Yeah, a little close.
It's still a flight. I need to be able to like drive. No,
Where are you?
I can fly. I'm near Philly. Yeah, Philadelphia area.
Are you near Lehigh University? Is that?
Yeah.
My son wants to go to Lehigh.
Okay.
Is it called? It's called Lehigh, right?
Yeah. It's in Allentown. Yeah, that's probably about an hour away. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, you must be south of Philly then.
I'm southeast. Yeah.
So okay. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, not a problem. We'll do this again sometime.
Absolutely.